Hello, and welcome back to Her Drive, the podcast where we journey through the wild, wondrous, and often untamed paths that women take to step fully into their purpose. I'm your host, Cynthia Crumblett, and today's guest is Kymber Maulden. She is the visionary force behind Nourishing Our Sanity, a deeply integrative approach to trauma healing that blends somatic therapy, spiritual wisdom, nutrition, and relational alchemy. I'm very excited to have her on the show today, and not only is this her platform for coaching and helping others, it's also a name of the podcast that she hosts. So without further ado, hi, Kymber. Welcome to Her Drive.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. Well, in this world of being, how do I say this, like multi-label, multifaceted, multi-skilled individuals, it's hard to kind of define what we do. But based on my research on you and reading about you and talking to you, it seems like you've really synthesized down what the work that you're doing to help women specifically within the nutritional space and somatics, etc. So can you boil it down for us in simple terms, and then we'll really get into all of the meat and consistence that consists of your work.
Yes. So I'm a nutritionist and a health coach, and I combine that with somatic therapies and specifically geared towards working with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I offer a combination of both metabolic support as well as psycho-emotional and like physiological nervous system work to help women who have these issues, because oftentimes they have all of these issues. When we have mental illness or we have trauma, it's not just a mind issue. And when we have metabolic illness and chronic illness, it's not just a body issue. And so that's kind of what I came to in my work as a nutritionist, and realized I needed to, take my work further to help the whole woman and instead of just the body.
Yeah, that makes such sense. In my life experience, I've always seen how things are just so stitched together. And I love that you came to that. So, learning a bit more about your practice, you touched on somatics. For those who don't know what that means, can we define that and explain a little bit about your work and how it applies to nutrition and wellness?
Yeah. So somatics is becoming, I think, and maybe it's just because I have focused more on it, so I'm seeing it everywhere. But it does seem like more popular now. It's growing in interest. There's a little bit of a buzz. There's a buzzword a little bit. It basically just means the living body. The soma is the living body, and so when you're doing a somatic therapy of any kind, you are working with the living body. So you could actually be doing somatics as a yoga teacher. You could be doing somatics as a physical therapist. But the idea of it is that you're connecting the brain and the body, and you're bringing conscious awareness back to the felt sense, which is everything that happens underneath upper cortical functions. So it's not just that you're moving, it's that you're actually consciously moving. And in the process, you're reconnecting the brain with the body.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for that beautiful explanation. Yeah, I find that so many of us, self included here, spend a lot of time living in my head and not paying attention to the body cues. So over time, I've come to find that in a lot of different healing modalities now, I listen to my body, and it's very clear what's going on. So I'd love to know a bit about like your personal journey and when you start obviously studying nutrition, like what was the growth path and the trajectory that led you even into nutrition to begin with, and then where you are right now.
Yeah, it was kind of a long journey. So my career and education background is actually in early child development and birth work. So I did that for years. But alongside that, I've always been interested in health because I had health issues myself, which is a really common component to a lot of people working in these fields, is that they struggled with their health and needed to seek something alternative in order to feel better. So I went through, first I studied a little bit of uh, holistic health at like a massage school, so holistic massage school years ago, and that was like my first taste of what it means to address the whole system, the whole body, and not just one isolated symptom, which is what I had kind of come from being medicalized in my teens. So I ended up deciding I wanted to go through nutrition school. So I went to get a science degree thinking I would become a dietitian. But at this point, this is like my mid 20s, I already had enough training in the holistic world to understand that I didn't really agree with some of the stuff that was being taught in the dietetics programs. So I took my science degree and went through a private holistic nutrition school. And then wasn't ready to start a business, was still quite kind of confused and disorganized around what I was doing myself. And so I just kept educating myself. So then I went through a health coaching program. I did some like functional trainings. I kind of like soft launched my business in like 2018-ish. And then, it took me another few years to realize I wanted to work specifically with women. And that was around pandemic time when I launched a women's health course, not currently running that course, but it did have like a really sweet 4 years run. And in that process, I started to understand how much women are poorly represented within the medical field and even within holistic and alternative medicine as well. And that kicked off a lot for me of just like research and looking at the world through the lens of a woman and like what affects us, what we've inherited, what, cultural issues are affecting us. And alongside this trajectory, I started to experience more of my trauma patterns coming up. And interestingly, like, because I have a high ACE score, and we can go into what ACEs are if you'd like in a minute. But I wasn't really aware of any of this at the time. And I knew I had some trauma, but I didn't really know what it meant. And I kind of just put it in the back burner. It was like, oh, this is an uncomfortable thing I talk about with a therapist sometimes. But interestingly enough, like as my business began to grow, the more successful I became, the more my trauma patterns became a disruption in my life. So it was like expanding was triggering more of my trauma patterns. And I started to see this in the women that I worked with as well, where we would work together on their nutrition and their lifestyle stuff, and they weren't really getting the results that other women were getting. Like it was pretty obvious that they had deeper, older patterns, maybe darker in the sense that they couldn't see them.
Sure.
But there was something going on there that was beyond just like what's happening in the moment. And that's when at the end of 2022, I started studying. I went into several other programs to work with the nervous system and with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so that's been a long journey of like, again, going through these programs, which I don't necessarily recommend someone do like jump into a bunch of these programs all at once because it's like these are not didactic programs. These are programs where you are learning about in real time, like what's happening inside your own body. So it's heavy in the processing, lots of stuff coming up. So I slowed my business down to like part-time so I could do all of this and have been over the last year and a half slowly building it back up because it's a completely different way of practicing. And I don't just do somatics, I do like NARM, which is one of the main approaches that I take to complex trauma. It stands for Neuroaffective Relational Model. That is a combination of top down and bottom up. So I still do a lot of talking, a lot of intellectual processing, using cognitive functions, working memory. That's, I think, where most people spend their time, and that's where most people feel safest.
Sure.
So somatics involves slowing things down, and that requires a level of safety and a level of trust. So oftentimes women will come to work with me for their metabolism, knowing that they have some trauma stuff, but we often will look at the metabolism first. We do psychoeducation work first, and slowly we get down into the body more and more as our relationship builds.
Yeah, perfect. There's so many things that you touched on that I can't wait to dance with. And the first one being what I've seen in my line of work, which is sex and intimacy and energy healing and blending things together, is that the difference between men and women. Men come in and they're ready to do like the physical stuff because my approach to coaching is it's like relationship labbing. So there's physicality that can be included or like more primal type of movements. But with women, I notice they feel much more comfortable in like the thoughts and telling of the story and the emotions of things. So that leads me to question with you and what's going on with women is the difference, right, of how we're wired. And you said you had made the choice to work specifically with women. So I'd love to kind of go down that little side trail for a while around why you chose to work only with women and why women are not so well represented, and ways in which women can start to take ownership of their health and wellness, and what that looks like for them from your perspective.
Yeah, there's like, this is a huge can of
Mm-hmm.
worms.
Mm-hmm. Let's open
I'm
it.
like, what should I address first? So with my decision to work with women, obviously I am a woman, and a large majority of the people who move into the alternative health space are women. Like, women are more likely to uh, care about their health. They're
Mm-hmm.
more likely to adopt a diet. They're more likely to, try some alternative approach. This is just like statistically, true. So for that reason, I think there was just more women out there that needed help.
Yeah.
So I was getting women seeking my help anyways.
Yeah.
So that was part of it. It was just like, this makes sense. I have the most experience and I have a female body. So, and as far as like the underrepresentation, I think there's different explanations or narratives around this, and I don't fully adopt the patriarchy has just been oppressing us, and that's a whole other can of worms. But I think reality is much more complicated than that, and women's bodies are more complex than men's. Our endocrine system is more complicated, and our reproductive system is harder to study. And this is actually a lot of my view into the differences between men and women is looking at the reproductive functions and what's tied in with them and what disrupts them. And women have a much more expensive system. And for that reason, we're more easily disrupted. Like, our entire health can be disrupted by disrupting our reproductive system, because every single system in our body is tied in with our fertility. And when it's more expensive, the damage is more expensive. And on top of that, we've got 60 plus years of hormonal birth control that has become so widespread and unquestioned that that's disrupted the research as well. So a lot of sex researchers, whether it's studying the brain or studying that, just like other parts of the body, have more or less treated women like small men, because our cycles would throw off the data so much. So it's only been in the last few decades that women's bodies have been studied. Cycling women, so not like non-cycling women, but cycling women have been studied and have been included in research. And even to this day, it's still limited.
Yeah.
So this is something that I don't think people fully realize, is that like the Western model was built upon studying men's bodies. So as of like, the mid-aughts, at least, like 8 out of 10 pharmaceuticals were recalled at various points because of lack of gendered research and the impacts that had on women's bodies when they took these drugs. And of course, like, there's a whole bunch of problems with Western medicine and like applying emergency medicine to chronic issues, which is a big, tangent that I can go on. But this whole like thing can also be applied to alternative medicine.
Right. And that's what really interests me as well. As you had said, a lot of alternative medicine is still male focused.
Yeah. And the reason for this is that, like, alternative medicine, there's not like a wing of alternative medicine, right? It's not like we can go on PubMed and it's like, here's the alternative medicine section. So like, it's kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of different studies and a lot of different people's theories. And a lot of it's still it's either based on speculation, or it's based on actual data, some of which is being used with the emergency model as well. Like, it's all, studies that we can base our ideas on. So you look at like nutrition epidemiology, and again, like, a lot of that's looking at male cultures in petri dishes or looking at male bodies. Again, this is starting to change, but it's not where we want it to be. It's not the level that we want it to be at. Same with exercise physiology. Like, because women are more vulnerable to stress, telling a woman to work out like a man can be very harmful to her health. And so that's also something we have to take into account. And I've gotten a lot of pushback from this. Like, this was a huge eye opener for me, just to focus on women's health and to talk about the differences. And I think part of this is because there's a lot of women out there that feel like talking about women being more sensitive to stress is a statement of that we're the weaker sex. And that's like pushes up against, third and fourth wave feminism that doesn't want to like maybe necessarily see those differences. So there's a lot of politicization in this topic, which is unfortunate because it needs to be talked about. But the way I see it is, again, like, we have to look at how humans have been behaving for hundreds of thousands of years, and women are the more vulnerable sex because of our reproductive functions.
Yeah.
And this is showing up in statistics. Like, this shows up in the fact that 80% of all autoimmune conditions are affecting women. Women are like 2 to 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with a mental illness. We're twice as likely to have hypothyroidism. We're more likely to have chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and all of these conditions that are difficult to treat and difficult to understand, especially with like the kind of more rough emergency medical model. And as well as like endocrine disorders, so PCOS, endometriosis, infertility, PMDD. So all of these things are affecting us for a reason, right? This isn't just like this random thing that suddenly is hitting us in the modern world with all of the resources we have now. And so I think a lot of it comes down to stress.
Okay. So if you had a magic wand and you could change anything within the feminine the landscape to help the feminine, what would it be?
It would be for women to repartner with their bodies and track their fertility.
Okay.
I think that would be number one. And that's something that I understand that birth control has a place, and it's kind of like you've let that cat out of the bag, and it's changed so many aspects of culture that to put it back in the bag would potentially cause a lot of harm to people, because there's just a complete change in sexual behaviors and so many different things. But I do think that learning to track your cycle is this open door to understanding yourself. It lowers the chances that you're going to end up with one of these illnesses that are, you're at higher risk for if you're on hormonal birth control. And you also, the way like I like to say it, the way I like to put it is, it's like your report card. Your monthly cycle is like your report card for how your overall health is doing.
Yeah. Because
our sex hormones are downstream from our thyroid and our adrenals, which are going to take the hit when we're stressed.
I see.
Yeah.
So what are some signs say someone gets off of hormonal birth control, they're tracking their cycle, it's been a couple of months or period of time. What are some things that they would want to look out for that are symbols of like vitality, wellness, and what are some signs that they're downflow from stress, from what you'd mentioned with the other glands and things?
I think one sign that your system is working well, or that that stress hasn't disrupted a lot, is that you have a monthly cycle that's consistent. So if you have a monthly cycle that's between 28, 32 days, around that, like, it does vary somewhat. That does tell you something. Your body is able to menstruate, and it's consistently menstruating. So that means that your hormones actually do have because we should be, men are circadian in their hormonal cycles. Women are infradian. So we have a 30-day-ish cycle. And if that's consistent for you, then that's sign number one. Like, you're bleeding every month. That's an energy intensive thing to happen. The body will take that away if it's under too much stress, because it's not immediately necessary for survival. So that's one thing. And if you have, a painless period, not painless in the sense of like you might have some cramping, you might have a little bit, like you're shedding, some things are happening that can cause some discomfort. But if you have debilitating pain, which myself and so many women do or have, then that's a sign that something's wrong.
Yeah.
And so if you have a consistent period and it's not completely throwing your entire life off every month, that's a good sign. Another great sign that you touched on the fact that you work with sexuality, and if you have a sex drive, like if you, this is one of my favorite, even as someone who's like, not had gone through periods of time where I was celibate for one reason or another, didn't have a partner, just tracking my desire and my like sense of sexuality as a being throughout the month can be so fascinating and empowering.
Yeah.
Right? Because the middle of your cycle, you naturally want to be seen more. You feel more sensual. Your thoughts might be changing. You might be thinking about men more, or women, or whoever it is that you're interested in. You might be thinking more just about like that kind of intimacy. And then as you start to move more towards menstruation through your luteal phase, you'll start to notice that goes down. You might not want to be looked at. You might actually have more of like a energy if someone's like giving you too much attention. Your energy shifts, your emotional experience shifts, and those things can be tracked. And it's a really beautiful thing to start to get to know yourself and to track these things.
Yeah.
And I've never been on hormonal birth control, but like there was definitely a long period of time throughout my 20s when I was dealing with a lot of trauma without realizing it, and my health wasn't great. I was undernourished, and so I didn't really track my cycle. I didn't really know what was happening. And once I started to pay attention, I started to track, that was like the first thing I noticed, which was really fun. Was like I used to joke that like there's a completely different experience going to the grocery store depending on where in my cycle I am, because when I'm in the middle of my cycle and I'm in my fertile window, I'm like following men around the grocery store. I mean, it's kind of joking, but kind of
Right.
not, like watching their muscles as they like grab food from the top shelf.
Of course.
And then like at the end of my cycle, I like don't even want to go to the grocery store.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same with the gym, right? Like if you work out, you'll know, like if you're a cycling woman and you pay attention to these things, you're at the gym and like middle of your cycle, you might be like okay with men watching you do squats.
Yeah.
End of the cycle, you're like disgusted by men that don't like wipe down the machines, you're like sweaty men, like gross, go away. It's like such a, that was such a clear thing for me. And it's really fun to watch. And it's like, this has nothing to do with how I actually think of men. It's purely, this is an endocrine experience. It's a hormonal experience.
Yeah.
Tied in with our reproduction. So
amazing. Beautiful. Thank you for dancing in this space with me. So you've made it evidently clear, very, very clear how we are different from men. And I would love to dance with some of the other things you'd mentioned, which is the Adverse Child Experiences, ACE or ACEs. Never heard of this acronym before, but would love to hear more about it.
Yeah, so it's a study that was conducted in the 90s with Kaiser Permanente, and it was basically what it looked at is for people who have difficult childhoods, who have traumas in their earlier years, what happens to them as they get older. And the study kind of opened the door to the conversation about complex developmental trauma. Before that, like, I think awareness of trauma in general has been this evolving thing where we didn't even, if you look at like early 20th century, we didn't even understand that trauma existed.
Yeah.
And it was basically like if you have a mental illness or a psychiatric illness or something bad that happens to you that disrupts your function, you're just, discarded, you're cast off. This is just how you are. Like no awareness of like brain neuroplasticity, none of that. And then we started to notice like PTSD, right? Like this is actually like a thing. Like people can go to war, they can become, they can be a victim of an assault, and this changes them. And so that became more of an awareness. And in some ways, that's where we're still kind of stuck. Like CPTSD isn't even on the DSM-5. Yeah. And a lot of people that I've worked with, and even just like conversations I've had online, a lot of people think they have PTSD and they talk about their trauma as if it's PTSD, but they actually have developmental trauma that happened to them when they were younger. That's just snowballed as they've gotten older.
Yeah.
So the ACE study, ACE stands for Adverse Child Experience. It looks at different adversities that people can experience during developmental years and what that does to their capacity to adapt and grow into, functional, healthy adults. And there's a whole list of different, like if you have an ACE score, there's a scoring system that you can actually take. You can go online and look at the score, take the score. If you have, I think it's like 65+% of the population has at least one ACE. And if you have 4 or more, then you're like far more likely, I forget what the percentage is right now, but you're far more likely to have a whole bunch of different chronic illnesses, addiction, incarceration, relationship problems, financial problems. So there's like a whole list of things. And that just stems from these difficult, not even just difficult, but like disruptive experiences that you have during these vulnerable developmental periods
I see.
in your childhood.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. And you mentioned complex PTSD. I had a therapist not that long ago, a few years ago, who was the first one to bring that to my attention. Didn't even know it was a thing. So how are you working with people who have complex trauma experiences and these adverse childhood experiences, excuse me, in your work now, whereas that may not have been a focus?
Yeah, so I went through a few different programs. So as I mentioned, I already had the like nutrition and metabolic stuff, and that is very useful here because the chances that you're going to have a chronic illness goes up. The chances that you're going to have what I call toxic stress physiology, which I believe is like an underlying root to a whole bunch of different health issues that a lot of people have when they're older that don't seem to go away, that don't, that are not responding to various treatments, even like alternative treatments. So that's one thing, is just like understanding some of the deeper roots to your health issues is a component of my work. And the other components are like, so I studied something called NARM, which stands for Neuroaffective Relational Model. It's a therapeutic practice that was designed specifically to address complex post-traumatic stress, especially like related to childhood ACEs.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different levels of it. I'm not licensed, and so I just took the first level. But I am like in ongoing education around it, and it's one of my favorite. I absolutely love it.
Sure.
It's one of my favorite modalities.
Yeah.
And that really helps you break down and understand the development. Also, I studied child development, and so with an emphasis on attachment. So this is stuff that I had previous experience studying. I just didn't. Now I'm applying it to adults and maladaptive behaviors, whereas previously it was just something that I was studying and then working with children. So it was kind of somewhat of a natural evolution. And then I also have a few other trainings. So I went through a somatic attachment coaching program, which is, I think, helpful because complex trauma isn't just in our head, right? Like it's a body and a mind issue. And I think this is one of the things that distinguishes CPTSD from PTSD. Excuse me. PTSD is a survival trauma. So a lot of people who have PTSD, there's some overlap in the physiology, but there is a lot of difference. Someone who has a traumatic experience that threatens their survival, it's a survival stress that lives in their body. So they can have flashbacks. They can go through that same adrenaline experience when they get triggered. They can live with some level of toxic stress physiology. Complex trauma is, because it happens and happens consistently during developmental years, it gets integrated into your sense of self. So it's more shame-based. There is a survival component to it. There is a stress component to it because we all have physiology geared towards survival. But when we say complex, we really do mean it's complex. Like it is oftentimes integrated into our personalities. It's integrated into our attachment patterns. It's integrated into like our ideas of how life feels and looks, and like what different things that happen to us mean about us and about the world. So there's a lot to tease apart. And I think like so the NARM approach is top down and bottom up, meaning we do somatics, but we also do psychoeducation, we do emotional processing. We really do look at the thought patterns that come along with complex trauma. And then I also have a somatic parts work certification, which is I would say is one of my favorites. I use it constantly. It's almost like a spiritual practice for me. I'm not sure if you've heard of parts work or IFS. I can share a little bit about what I
Yeah,
learned.
let's definitely go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, so it originated from a particular form of therapy called internal family systems.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, developed by Nick Schwartz. And it's just this idea that we are not singular beings, we are multitudinous. And this is true in our minds. So, like, what he would say that I'm sure is controversial in some circles is that multiple personality disorder. I think there's another name for it now, like dissociative person. Yeah, I don't want to butcher that, but everyone has that. Is his point? It's just the difference between someone who has a clinical psychiatric disorder that's disrupting their lives to that level versus everyone else is that their parts are further apart. Like they have less integration in their parts
Hmm.
and they're more maladaptive.
I
And
see.
so the idea is like we come into this world and we have a true self, right? Like a blank slate, a spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it. This is where I think it's deeply spiritual. And having worked with like small children and babies, I agree with this. I think that we come into this world and there is a level of purity there, even if we have some, metabolic and biochemical predispositions. And through our experiences, through having an external family, whether that's our blood family or a community or, depending on the circumstances we're born into, we also develop an internal family. We develop
Mm.
different parts in reaction to our experiences, especially those experiences that are disruptive and traumatic. And so when you're interacting with someone, especially a difficult person, you're often interacting with their protector parts. So you're interacting with all of the parts that they've developed in an attempt to protect themselves from very, very vulnerable experiences. And there are parts of them that we call exiled parts. These are very vulnerable parts, young parts, parts that weren't safe, that they put those away. You may not see those ever, right? Like those parts are deeply hidden. And so the idea of working with these parts is starting to discern between self and part,
Mm.
which is very liberating. I think it can be kind of, for some people, it's intuitive. Like when I started doing this work with a practitioner, it was like, oh, that's what that is. I've been doing this for years without realizing that's what I was doing. But for some people, it's very confusing, and they're just like, is this a part? Is this a part? So you're helping them, and I do it in a somatic I do it in a top down and a bottom up way. So we're looking at how parts show up as cognitive distortions, how they show up as narratives about yourself and the world,
Yeah.
and also how they show up as somatic patterns and symptoms. So like you might have a breathing issue
Mm.
or chronic pain, or these are all, to a large extent, they show up during specific experiences. They're there to protect us from, um, um, you know, perceived harms, perceived threats.
Yeah, that's super interesting to me. And I would love, you just gave it an example physiologically, like with breathing. But can we do like made up like case study example of what this might look like from the different lenses, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of some patterns that clients have. Um, I could even use, yeah, so I have some clients that have some similar patterns to me that I've had as well. So women tend to be more likely to have like good girl parts, like fawning parts.
Hmm.
And anyone can have these patterns, but I have noticed that because women are more sensitive to violence, we're more sensitive to, um, just like stress in general. But I would say when women are dealing with violence or unsafe circumstances, they often behave differently than men. And we're more likely to move into like a fawning behavior. So for a lot of my clients, they have those parts. They have those people pleasing, fawning, good girl parts that can show up in the sense of like, if they're dealing with a difficult situation, they're dealing with a situation with their housemate or with their partner, um, they may have an immediate feeling that comes up of like, I have a boundary. Like something happened here and my boundary has been pushed. Oftentimes, the immediate response to that is a protector part that fawns, that comes up and says, what did I do wrong? Let me over explain. Let me try to make this right. Let me be the peacekeeper. Let me try to please this person. And this can even work with me too. Like I definitely have clients that, I'll have to ask them like where, or we'll go into a safe space where is this how you really feel about this? Or is that fawning part showing up wanting to please me as your practitioner? And sometimes that's the case where it's like they don't really want me to know what's going on. They want to please me. And so that fawner shows up, right? That fawning part shows up. Oftentimes, what we can do is we can speak directly to that fawning part. And you can do this with any part, right? Like you can potentially make contact with them, communicate with them. They may or may not be open. They may not feel safe. But in my practice, we do this in a combination of top down and bottom up. So in those terms, by the way, like bottom up is somatic, top down is like upper cortical. So, slowing down, getting into the body, touching the parts where touching it, maybe a part of the body where that part is showing up, getting to a safe place where that particular part is willing to show up and talk to us, and asking that part what that part needs. Like, what is it that you're trying to do? What are you trying to protect me from? What do you need? And what can we do to get you to step aside so we can actually look at what's underneath you? Like what the thing that you're trying to protect.
Yeah.
And there's a few things about parts work that I find to be incredibly helpful for CPTSD. One is that a lot of us, and I would say this potentially is true for everyone, but specifically if you have CPTSD, this is going to be more true. We're not all one age, right? Like if you there's parts of us that are still 10, there's parts of us that are 13, that are 8. If we had traumatic things happen to us at very specific developmental phases and ages, then we may have parts that are frozen in time and they don't realize that we're no longer 4.
Right.
And I have clients that have been, abused. And so they have parts that are frozen at 4 and at 8 and at 12. And those parts do not know how old they are. And so there's something in NARM we call adult consciousness, like bringing yourself back to adult consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of this work is it's a gradual thing, but allowing yourself to understand, to integrate and to understand what's self and what's not, and to develop confidence in the adult in the room.
So by bringing awareness to these younger aspects that are frozen and developing the adult self, do you then fuse the two together? Like does the child self become unfrozen, integrated into the adult self in some way?
In parts work, we often refer to this as like unblending or uncoupling. And it's not because these parts are not really us. Like we're no longer 5, we're no longer 4. So what tends to happen is the more confident we become in our adult self and our adult consciousness, the less those parts are needed.
I see.
And there's a book, a really great book that Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS, wrote called No Bad Parts. And his point in this book is that there's every protector part, even the most extreme that drives us to do some pretty awful stuff, is there with some intention to protect us. Sure. And he actually learned this from working with going into prisons and working with people who are in prison for a long time for doing really bad stuff. Okay. And what he noticed is that even those people have a lot of internal disorganization, a very unintegrated sense of self, and parts that hate other parts, right? Like, so it's like constant internal conflict.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't obviously like justify bad behavior, but it is like there's a reason that people behave the ways they do. And a lot of us with CPTSD and just with like chronic stress patterns, and I would even say chronic illness, there's often a lot of internal disorganization, a sense of helplessness in how to remain an adult, how to like lead our lives and have agency over our lives. So this work can actually help you start to understand and like in a felt experience,
sure,
where your agency lies.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me. Well, sticking with the vein of like younger versions of ourselves, and I imagine you've done a lot of this work on yourself, as you've mentioned when we started. If you could go back in time and give a younger you some words of wisdom, to what age would you go and what would you say?
That's a hard one for me because because I think that I had a lot of wisdom from a young age, but it wasn't integrated. And it's hard to tell someone something they're not really ready to integrate,
Sure.
if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I honestly, I have to say, I really don't know.
Yeah.
I've had, I started my spiritual journey very early in life and became, like a Buddhist groupie in my early 20s, meditating a lot, like surrounded by a lot of very self-aware, wise people.
Mm.
And I got a lot of nuggets of wisdom passed down to me because I was struggling a lot, and people would see it and they would say, "You're so young. Like, here's my wisdom as like a, 40-year-old or whatever."
Yeah.
And I look back at that and I'm like, I received it in the only way I knew how, which was to some extent was an unintegrated intellectually reception.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I would say, like, if I could go back, I would say probably the thing that I would tell myself is don't diet. Don't force, like, forcing yourself to physically, like, the forcing ourselves to heal, the kind of like aggressive top down approach to healing is tends to make things worse.
Yeah.
And women are the most likely to diet, right? Like, we're the most likely to have eating disorders, which I had for almost a decade. We're the most likely to overexercise. And so there is this really common pattern that we have as a sex to force ourselves to be better. And we take that into our alternative healing and into our spirituality too.
Yeah, we really do. Well, for those women who are just beginning what we'll call their healing journey, what steps would you suggest that they take to start reconnecting with their body, their health, and their spirit?
Yeah, I would say, again, respecting and honoring that you have a female body, which is, somewhat controversial in some circles these days. But I think regardless of how it looks,
Sure.
regardless of how you talk about it, just understanding that if you have female reproductive system, if you have, like, that means something. It's going to mean something about how your brain works. It's going to mean something about how your immune system works. And if you can just accept and respect that, then you can start making choices out of that are more likely to lead you toward healing and less likely to lead you towards unwanted trade-offs, like harm down the road, because we don't often know the results of our choices until years later.
Sure. Sure. Wow. It was a fantastic, amazing time talking with you, Kymber. I would love to just open the floor if there's anything else that you would like to share that we haven't touched on.
I don't think so. I mean, if anyone is interested in knowing more about me, I'm not as online as I, probably should be, as having an online business, for the sake of my nervous system. But I do have a podcast as well. So definitely check that out. And if you want to understand your metabolic health more, like, I would say, looking into the mineral piece, like looking at your minerals. I run mineral tests on women and I want more people to know about it. And that's like an easier way to work with me because it's just a one-off.
Yeah.
But that's something that I'm starting to get more excited about talking about. And it's a great doorway into understanding your female physiology.
Oh, amazing. Well, just touching on that before we go, like, so many people talk about protein, protein, protein. But I'm like, what about minerals, minerals, minerals?
Yeah. I mean, both are important,
Yeah,
for sure.
for sure.
For sure. And I think if we're not getting enough protein, then we don't handle our stress well, and then we lose our minerals faster.
Yeah.
And protein, depending on where you get it, can be a good source of minerals. But yeah, minerals are, I mean, they are like, I'm about to release tomorrow. I'll be releasing a new podcast episode where I go into minerals, and it's going to be the one of a series. Because there's just nothing in our health that isn't touched by minerals. They are the building blocks of, they're they make, there's a spark plug. It's not the building blocks. They make everything work. And so if you don't have an understanding, just a basic understanding of them, it's really easy to make decisions for your health that don't move the needle.
Yeah. Wow. That makes perfect sense. Well, thank you, Kymber, for being a guest on Her Drive. Everyone, you can find Kymber at her website, kymbermaulden.com. That will be in the show notes. And is there anywhere else, Kymber, that you'd like them to look you up?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. That's like the social media platform I probably mostly use. So it's just the same thing, Kymber Maulden. And you can also find my podcast linked into my Instagram and my website as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for being here. And thanks everyone for tuning in to this episode of Her Drive. As always, I ask that if you really receive the nutrients of this show, please leave a review. It helps others find it, as well as share with others who you know could really ingest a bit of yumminess into their hearts, their minds, and their spirit. Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you.